sometimes when people want to buy a business with zero money down, it sounds sexy, it sounds cool. But if you flip the script and just state it another way, you're buying a business at 100% debt.
Welcome to Built in Vegas, the podcast where we spotlight the stories, strategies, and resources behind the businesses that make Vegas thrive. Whether you're starting up or scaling up, you're in the right place. Brought to you by the Video Podcast Studio.
I'll give you the quick backstory. My dad sold a company when I was in high school, and I watched him go through the process of getting an offer from, at the time I didn't know it was a private equity group, but I watched him go through the process of them coming out, doing due diligence, made him an offer. Originally, when he got their offer, it was like more, hey, are you interested in selling? He said no. He had a family business. He was going to continue to run it. And I was the oldest boy. That was like my ticket to easy life. And it was a pretty good sized company. It was, depending on the time of the year, 500 to 600 employees. But they made him an offer that he couldn't say no to. And so I watched him go through that, which is what originally got me interested in the industry. You can't do it coming out of high school or even college. And so I knew it wasn't something I could do right away, but it was on my radar to look at doing in the future.
Yeah, it's such an interesting field because you see so much. Mm-hmm. You know, like I see all your...
Every day is different.
I see all your posts, and I think that there's a common misconception for most small business owners getting into business is like, oh, I could just sell this one day. Mm-hmm. But they don't really understand, like, anything about what goes into that process. I know I was super naive at it too originally, and then I realized, oh, what I've been building my whole life, I can't ever sell for anything because it's based around me. Yeah. It's not like a real business. So that's when I was like, okay, let's try to start building something that we can scale and sell in the future.
Yeah, it takes a unique operator to build a business that really works. It's got the systems, the processes, procedures that can be sellable. For every business is sellable. You can always sell it for something. But the businesses that really sell for a good multiple are the businesses that have a unique operator that have strategically built something that's not dependent on them. And that's not most business owners. Most business owners just get so caught up in the day-to-day whirlwind of working in the business, they don't have the time or the emotional maturity to kind of separate themselves out of the business and really build out the processes that can work without them. And so they get stuck selling. Yeah, they can sell it, but it's not going to be a huge payday for them like it is if someone built a real absentee-owner business. And then the next question is, if they really built an absentee-owner business, then why are they selling it? And so we get buyers all the time. They're like, I want to buy this absentee business on the side, and we'll let everyone else do the work. And it doesn't really work that way. Very rarely, I should say, does it work like an absentee-owner business.
Yeah, I actually saw your post about that recently too, where you're talking about like how that's kind of like a myth, right? Like if it was actually absentee, like why would this owner ever sell it? Now there could be reasons, right? Like, oh, I want to put a big chunk of money over here now and go invest in X, Y, and Z. Yeah. But really, if it was just cash flowing and no stress, no worries ever.
Yeah, I have one right now that's in escrow, $5.2 million, absentee owner. And it's the operator has the skill set. So he's done this with a number of businesses. He doesn't even live in the state where the business is. So the question is, why is he selling it? There's an actual real reason. It's part of his divorce settlement. So he's selling off 3 of his businesses to pay off whatever he's got to pay off in the settlement. But he specifically said, if I didn't have this reason, this divorce, I wouldn't have sold the business, or I wouldn't be in the process of selling it to begin with. But it's a unique operator who can build that.
Yeah. Well, what do most businesses or business owners get wrong when they think about trying to sell their business?
When they're trying, first off, they start too late. They've gotten, like I was saying, they've gotten so caught up in the day-to-day whirlwind of the business. All of a sudden they wake up and one of a couple things happen. It's 25 years later and they're burned out and they're like, I got to get out of this. And they don't even like the business anymore. and all of a sudden now they're forced to sell it quickly because they hate the business and they don't want to start having it decline, or they haven't spent the time to really build out the systems, the processes, the procedures, follow a real strategic plan to prepare to sell the business, and someone gets sick, or a divorce happens, or a job opportunity comes up for a spouse. All of those are like legitimate reasons why they need to sell, but all of a sudden they're caught off guard and they haven't spent the 2 or 3 years that they really need to beforehand to prepare to exit at top dollar. And so they exit at bottom to mediocre dollar because they're forced to sell it quicker than they probably should if they just put a little foresight into it.
Is it about a 2-year like plan to kind of really get it to where it probably needs to be on the like financial records?
Yeah, ideally 2 or 3 years. SBA will always, and a buyer's going to want to see 2 or 3 years financials, sometimes 5 years, especially when it comes to COVID. They want to see how did the business do before COVID, how did it do after COVID, how did it do during COVID. But they'll want to see, and that takes some time, right? If you're going to try and build a business that's not dependent on you, you can't just exit out of it in 6 months and say, oh, that business works without me. They want a history. They want historical records to say, okay, this business can work without the seller. It's not built around his relationships, his personality, and we've got a good track record to say, yeah, over the last 3-4 years, business is steady or growing. You don't want to see it declining without the owner there.
And for, have there been any occasions where a business owner thought it was worth X because they were bringing X amount of dollars and it just wasn't worth that?
Every occasion. Every seller, just like every parent thinks their kid's the best looking kid, right? Every seller thinks their business is worth more than it is. And so part of my education is when I go through and meet with potential sellers, I'm educating them on what sellers' discretionary earnings is, what EBITDA is, what market multiples are, what debt service coverage ratios are. And we're not just kind of randomly, this is a big mistake I did early, and I still see most business brokers do this. They just go in and tell the seller what their business is worth. And the problem with that is most sellers are like, oh no, my business is worth way more than that. And it's this like fight of broker's opinion versus seller's opinion with no logic or math behind it. And so I totally changed my concept. When I go into sellers, in fact, I do this before I go into sellers. I send them videos where I'm educating them ahead of time on what sellers' discretionary earnings is, why it's important, what DSCR is, why it's important, where it needs to be, so that when I meet them, I can then sit down and we can calculate what seller's discretionary earnings is. We can calculate what EBITDA is. We can back into, is this an SBA compliant business based on the market multiples? I show them, I pull up on my screen the market comps, and I go through the process and I say, look, here's seller's discretionary earnings. Here's what your industry, based on your size, based on your area, are selling for on average. And if your seller's discretionary earnings, for the sake of easy math, is $200,000 and the market multiple is 2.5, it's no longer my opinion versus what the seller opinion is. It's now just simple math. That's what the numbers are. They can't change the market multiple. They can change the SDE, the seller's discretionary earnings, if they're putting in time and effort in the future, but we're looking at historical numbers. They can't change that. It's now just a math problem. And so it's a matter of, are they willing to sell the business for what the fair market dictates and what it would be a compliant purchase price with SBA loans? Are they willing to sell it at that price, or do they need to keep this thing and grow it for another couple of years? And if they really think their business is worth more, then they need to actually get it to perform better, because no one buys off of potential. Let me rephrase that. They'll buy it because the business has potential, but they don't pay for potential. They pay for historical performance. They'll buy it because it's got unrealized or untapped potential, but no one's coming in here, at least in the small business space, no one's coming in here and saying, yeah, this business really has some potential. If I put in a lot of work over the next 10 years, it's going to grow, so I'm going to pay the seller for all the future growth and time I'm going to have to put into it. That doesn't work. And sellers don't always necessarily get that up front.
That's funny, Because I could see that some sellers probably think that they're like, no, but this is going to be worth so much more, so pay me more. It's like, but yeah, if the historical data is not there,
Yeah.
it's really just based off of those numbers. It goes back to like that saying, like, business doesn't care about your feelings, right? It's just numbers at the end of the day.
Just numbers. Yeah.
I remember, like, when I talk to my team, that's kind of what I always kind of go back and talk to them about. Like, look, everything's just numbers in business. It all comes down to our input and outputs of how much we're making, what our cost is, and what our goals are. And we just have to do, if we're going to be doing sales, for example, there's a math equation that makes sense that tells us if we reached out to X amount of people, we'll receive X amount of clients from that. So it's just numbers. We just have to input more. And then, when it comes to selling or buying, it's just what do those numbers look like? And let's fill.
And here's the interesting thing. Because it's just math and it's just a formula, like you say, if going back to my example, let's say someone had that business that had $200,000 SDE and the market multiple was 2.5. So in theory, their business is worth roughly $500,000, right? In this made up example, there's a lot more into valuations, but because it's, like you said, a math formula, if the seller wants to sell their business for, instead of $500,000, they say, you know what, I'm not willing to sell this for less than $1 million. Great. Instead of taking the SDE times the market multiple, all we have to do is take the ideal sales price divided by the market multiple. That then tells us how much net profit the business needs to produce over the next couple of years to justify the $1 million purchase price. So it's a simple math formula of not only what their business is worth today, but if it's not worth enough, all you have to do is reverse the math formula, and it tells them what they need to do to hit their growth and projection plans to make them historical to then justify that asking price.
So what's the first step? Like, if somebody's going to go sell their business and they work with a broker like you, like, kind of what's the first step?
First step is to get a general sense of the valuation. Are we even on the same playing field as far as what their business is worth from a fair market standpoint versus what they think they want to sell it for, or what they need for retirement? For a lot of sellers, this is their biggest asset. And a lot of them haven't put a lot of time or effort into planning. And so if that's the case, then the sale of their business becomes so vitally important because that's going to be what funds their retirement. So do they know what that figure is? And then is the current valuation worth enough to fund that for them to hit their target? That's the first step. If at that point we're not on the same page, then they need to go back and grow the business. And the challenge is you can't just go back and grow the business for a few months or even a year. We're looking at historical performance over 3 years. So if I meet with someone today and they say, my business isn't worth it, I need to grow it. No problem. But you got 4 years at least of work, because I got to get let's say you grow it and it's as easy and as quick as the seller says it is, which it never is. But let's just, in this made up example, say they can grow it over a year. Great, do it. But then you got to stabilize it for 3 years. So you're not looking to sell this for another 4 years, maybe 5 years by the time it actually sells. So they got to have the time, they got to have the effort, the energy, the passion, and the knowledge to really grow it, and then to stabilize it. So, but if the business is priced at the right point, then it's just a matter of building out the pitch deck, getting all the information to take it to market confidentially, and then start filtering through potential buyers until we find the right buyer who's going to make an acceptable offer.
I would think you should only really sell the business if you are working with a business broker, right? Because to me, like, just thinking as like a small business owner, if I'm going to go sell, I wouldn't know what contracts to have in place. I wouldn't know, like, if I'm getting screwed by these people, if I'm doing the right thing, am I getting what my business is actually worth? But in your opinion, like, why do you think there's so much value behind working with a business broker?
That's such a good question, and there's so much we could talk about. I'll give you just maybe a couple examples. One, because most people, like you'd mentioned, they don't even know where to begin, let alone if they knew how to begin, how are they going to keep it confidential? So when I take a business to market, a really good one, I'm going to get 100, 200, 300 inquiries fairly quick. I got to filter through all of those tire kickers and figure out who's serious and vet them. The problem is if the owner is now doing that process, it takes them away from running their business. Now their business starts to trend down, which is the worst time to sell it. Or what happens is employees start to overhear the owner because he's on the phone all day long talking about answering questions about selling. Confidentially, word gets out. One or two, the buyers, potential buyers, are actually talking with the seller before they've even signed non-disclosure agreements or been vetted. Word really gets out, and that can be damaging. Employees start to worry, and here's the reality. Every business, well, let me put it this way. Every movie where a business is sold is exactly opposite of what happens in real life. In the movies, you sell a business and everyone gets fired, or a lot of people get fired, right? In the real life, that doesn't happen, at least in small businesses. The employees are more important than ever to the buyer, but employees don't know that. They see the movies where, oh, the business boss is selling the business, we're all going to get fired. And they think, they start scrambling. They start looking for other jobs. Word gets out. It can be really devastating if it's not done confidentially. So that's one reason. But another reason is the broker setting expectations, making sure that the seller doesn't think, oh, I think my business is worth $1 million, so I'm going to put it on the market, when the valuation can't support it, or the SBA loan, the debt service coverage ratio can't support it. So expectations is a big thing, and then guiding them through that process. Just like you had mentioned, most sellers don't know enough to do this on their own. And there's some major pitfalls. I'll give you one example. Successor-liability, for example. There's stock sales and there's asset sales. Even if someone does an asset sale, which supposedly limits the liability, if the seller has past due payroll or sales tax, the buyer, even though they formed their own entity, that liability follows the buyer. So I've seen this in real life multiple times where we show up to escrow and we get Department of Taxation clearance, and all of a sudden there's a $100,000 bill that's coming off the top that escrow is going to pay to make sure that the buyer is buying the business without any liability. But had they done this transaction on their own, the buyer would have been stuck with that $100,000 because they didn't even know to go to the Department of Taxation and get a clearance letter. So there's all sorts of pitfalls.
Yeah, it seems crazy to me to try to sell or buy without a broker because, there's just so many variables, so many things.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I would have never thought about something like that. Of like, oh, did they pay their past taxes? I'd be like, oh, just look at, you're making this much money? Cool, yeah, let's buy it. You know?
Yeah, and I've seen it literally dozens of times where people try and do this on their own, and they get stuck with that, and the buyers just can't comprehend it. They're like, that wasn't my business. That was his. You go talk to him. I bought the business. I started a new corporation. It's not how it works. They're now stuck with that liability, and it's such a hard pill to swallow. In one instance, I saw that the liability that the buyer got stuck with was more than the purchase price of the entire business. It was crazy.
Jeez, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Moving over to the buyer side, what are some, common misconceptions that buyers have when it comes to businesses? Now, I know we already talked about one about absentee businesses, and I'm sure everybody wants that. They're like, I want to buy a business for $100,000 that makes me $2 million a year, and I never have to show up.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's probably the biggest misconception. But what are some things that buyers need to understand about this process?
Another misconception is zero money down, like no money out of pocket. That's kind of becoming popular online. It's one thing to have an absentee business, but then to think you're going to buy it without any money out of pocket, I mean, you might as well just go look for Bigfoot. It's just not going to happen. The reality is most businesses, and don't get me wrong, there are plenty of people who buy businesses with no money down, but it takes a combination of a few things. A dumb seller, honestly, because what good seller that's educated, that has a real solid business, is going to sell his business for no money down? He's uneducated. He doesn't have anyone helping him through the process, and he's leaving a tremendous amount of money on the table from the sell side. Because if it's a good, solid business, a buyer's going to go get an SBA loan and get funding for 80-90% of the whole thing, and the seller's going to get paid up front. The other thing is most businesses that are sold at zero money down are, for the most part, distressed turnaround businesses where the seller is like, I don't care, just get rid of this thing. I don't want the liability anymore. I don't want to deal with it anymore. It's a turnaround job. So can you do it zero money down? Yeah, but you're not going to do it without buying yourself a full-time job to turn it around and build the business and get it operational. And that's not to say that you can't buy a business and then build yourself the processes and procedures and get out of the day-to-day operations, but it's not going to happen day one. You're not going to buy a business and then never show up and just think the employees are going to run it and do everything as great and wonderful as you would, and you have no relationship with the sellers. You have no culture that you've built in. You don't know the KPIs to even measure it from afar. And that's another risk, is buying a business, another myth, buying a business that you have no industry experience with.
Yeah, that's what I was just about to bring up, because like for me, like I've always wanted to buy like a nail salon or something like that, because I'm like, oh, that seems kind of easy to manage, but I'm like, I know nothing about that industry. Like I can help market it, I can help, run it, but like if we don't have text, what do I do? Like I don't know how to paint nails or do this or do that, or like even where do we hire them? Like it seems so abstract to me. Like eventually the goal for us is to build this to sell. I'd like to sell within 5 to 10 years from now, and try to get a few different locations, try to make it not owner operated. For the very beginning, I was like, all right, I don't even want to be on camera. I don't even want to be like a face of this, because I want this not owner operated. But we're so small that like,
you have to.
This is owner operated, and people are going to come because they like me right now, and then eventually we'll change our marketing and our brand strategy away from me. I'll still be a big part of building the relationships, but eventually we'll hire for those positions. But like, I can't imagine getting into like, I don't know. I asked to buy into a hair salon, and I was like, I don't like. Sounds cool. Like maybe if I did just the rental space, like a solo salon type stuff, I can maybe do that, because that's just like owning a rental property, kind of. It's still different. Yeah. And then try to get them leads. But like if I was to like hire hair salon, like hairstylist, cosmetologist, like I don't know anything about that industry.
Yeah, that's the biggest problem. I always tell buyers, buy something that you have either direct industry experience with or some sort of ancillary. Like you could make a case. And again, from a lender standpoint, they're going to ask the same question. If you looked at buying let's say I've got a fantastic medical billing practice for sale. If you go to a lender and say, I want to borrow $2 million to buy this medical billing, they're going to ask you, well, why are you the right guy to run that if you have no experience doing medical billing? So it's a tough sell to a lender if you have no experience, not only from a practical standpoint of how are you actually going to run it and have the employees take you at all credible, and have the vendors and the customers take you credible if you have no experience at all. And so thinking you're going to buy a business and I'm just going to let the managers run it. Could you do it? Yes. But man, that is high risk.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine not knowing anything about the business and trying to get into it. And then you do get into it and you have to like learn everything over. You're probably stalling the business from growth. And
talking about risk, let's be honest here. If a buyer comes in and gets an SBA loan, they're personally guaranteeing it. Their spouse probably has to as well. They're putting their home up as collateral. Are you really willing to risk all of that for some $60,000, $70,000 manager per year? That's what they're getting paid to run the whole business, and hope that your entire family finances don't completely implode because it's riding on the back that this manager that you have no relationship with is going to look out for your best interest? That's a risk if I ever. And the whole point of buying a business is to, at least the way you should be buying it, is to minimize that risk.
Yeah, I think the problem is social media, right? You have all these influencers and these gurus telling them all like, you can buy these things and work. You'll never work in ever.
It's clickbait. That's the problem. They buy into the clickbait.
Yeah, it's crazy to me, because like I have a lot of conversations with a lot of small business owners or people who want to get into entrepreneurship, and they're like, oh yeah, like I could just buy this and never work again in my life. I'm like, dude, like that's not how this works. Or I'll just start a business and then I'll never have to work. I'm like, I work so much.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
It's so tiring.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen like where, you probably didn't help them buy it, because I assume you would guide them away from not buying the wrong thing. But like where somebody bought a business thinking, oh, this is absentee, I don't have to do anything, and then they quickly are like over their head and they're trying to sell it.
Yes. I can give you a couple examples. One of them is an eyelash studio. They do eyelash extensions, and they thought it was run absentee. And to be honest, it was run absentee. The problem is it's only run absentee because the seller put in all the years and the time and the experience to know the industry, to build relationships with the employees, and then they could run it absentee. The buyers come in and they don't have great experience. And you can, from a bank standpoint, you can go to them and say, look, I have experience managing people. Although I don't know how to do eyelash extensions, I can manage a team. And you can make a case for that. So they were able to get a bank loan, but they had no real experience to know how to manage it properly. They didn't even know what to look for from like a KPI standpoint, so that they could start to get a feel for, are there problems on the horizon? Because they don't know how to manage it. They have no relationship with the employees. So the employees are loyal to the sense of that's the new boss, but they're not loyal to the sense of I really like them and have built a relationship and want to look out for them. And it ended up going badly because they weren't watching it as closely as they should. The employees weren't feeling like they were managed well because they never came in, which, I mean, what do you expect of these employees? They're not going to run the business like an owner. If the owner's not there, they're going to get lazy. They're going to get lax. Money starts going into pockets. Money starts missing. Corners start being cut on services and the quality. And it really started trending downhill. And so the only way to turn that around is the owner's got to get back involved. Now, that's not to say they can't buy it and eventually get to the point where they can step out, but it's got to, I tell these guys, you got to put in 6 months at least. Be there every day. Plan on buying yourself a job for 6 months. Build the relationship, get in the culture, learn the business, develop the rapport with the employees, with the staff, with the customers, and then slowly get your way out. But it's not going to happen overnight.
Oh, I love that. So I have some quotes from your Facebook page, from your post, which I love your posts, by the way.
Yeah, thanks.
I pretty much only go on Facebook to see your posts. It's actually true. But so there's one here that you said, most people do due diligence like they're driving a car while staring into the rearview mirror. Sure, you can see where the business has been, but you're going to miss the truck that's about to hit you head on. Can you dive a little bit deeper into that?
Yeah, so due diligence is historical in nature, which is important. Every buyer needs to do due diligence, and you need to look backwards, just like a valuation looks historical in nature. But there are front-looking metrics and backwards-looking metrics. Both are important. Backwards metrics are, like we talked about, historical in nature, the due diligence, what they do last year, what they do last month, what they do the last 3 years. But what does it look like moving forward? What's the industry look like? What are the projections? Are there customer contracts in place? Are there vendors? Is there a new lease that's coming up for renewal that's going to make a significant change to the amount that they're paying? All of those things need to be done almost like in a projection of forward-looking due diligence rather than just looking backwards and historical in nature, both of which are important, but one isn't necessarily the only way to look at it, meaning backwards. You want to look forward as well, which goes to the same point we've been making. Are you the right driver of that business to drive it? A business that's making a bunch of money is essentially like a car driving down the freeway at 60, 70 miles an hour. You don't have the luxury of stalling out and making a mistake or swerving and making a mistake when you're in business and that much is going on. If you're in startup mode, you could stall out in the parking lot and no one really cares. You can recover. But when you're going down the road and the business that you just bought for $2 million is making millions of dollars in revenue. It's hard to recover from mistakes if you're not looking forward and only looking backwards.
Something you said, like sometimes you might not be the right person, right? One thing that like I come into this industry knowing is as I build, like I don't think I'm a CEO, right? Like I'm a founder. I'm gonna work and I'm gonna grind. Eventually, when we get to a certain spot, like I plan on building an executive team and hiring an actual CEO so we can build and get bigger and bigger and scale. Because I don't think every owner is meant to take their business to the next level. I don't think they have the skill set to, and I know I don't. Like I know that. I know where I'm at, and I think I can get to a certain level. I have a client of mine that like I'm basically trying to build just to get him to come on and then help me scale to the next level and do what he's been able to do. And I know I don't have that skill set, so I think that's something that like business owners need to be.
Well, good for you for recognizing
aware
that.
of.
And he said another way to that question, it's lead measures versus lag measures. Lag measures are backwards looking. They're looking in the rearview mirror. Lead measures are looking forward. And if you don't know the business well enough, all you can do is look at lag measures. How did they perform? How did the sales team do this month, yesterday, last year? But lead measures are all the things that give you a good indication of what's on the horizon, which eventually turn into lag measures. But if you don't know the industry well enough, you don't even know the lead measures to measure and to ask to begin with.
Yeah, I love that. So buyer seller due diligence, that's probably pretty important to do, right? Because not everybody's the right fit to buy a business or to even sell it to somebody. And sometimes I assume deals happen because deals don't happen because the seller's probably like, screw that guy, I don't like him or whatever. Maybe legacy was important and this person's like, I don't care about your legacy or whatever. You had one recently where the buyer said, good luck with this business. I'm selling because I'm losing all my hair from stress, but I see you're already bald. So I guess you're ahead of the game. You got nothing less to lose. And then you wrote brutal, honest, hilarious. Welcome to small business ownership. Hair today, gone tomorrow. Yeah, can you dive into like the due diligence process though?
Yeah, so that was funny. I couldn't believe he said it, but he said it just so like bluntly, and it was the first time the buyer and seller were meeting for due diligence. So this was over Zoom, and to his point, he's selling the business because it's stressful and it's hard, and it's not just sit on the beach and watch the business roll in and make all this money. And the other guy had already lost his hair, and this guy was, being facetious about it. It was funny but brutal, but it was true. And I actually was glad he said it so that the buyer knew exactly what they were getting into. Like this was a business that was going to take some work and some effort, and it wasn't going to be easy. And I'd rather have the buyer know that going into it than be surprised by it.
If the business only works, another thing that you said, with 3 locations, it doesn't work. That's like saying this parachute only opens if 3 people pull on the cord at the same time.
Yeah, so I get this a lot. A single location, sometimes it's 2 locations, and the business just isn't making money. It's not profitable. But somewhere along the way, someone's convinced the seller that this is a this is an opportunity to scale. That all of a sudden, if they get 3 or 4 locations, then they're going to start making money. The problem is, if you can't make it work with 1 location, then you're not ready to scale. You got to nail the numbers on the first location to be able to scale. Opening up 5 locations and hoping you can make up for it on the margin is just such a risky venture. And I learned this from a Dickey's barbecue seller that has 40 locations. And collectively, all 40 locations make good money. But if you take the individual single locations one by one, they really don't do well. And so he's stressed to the max and has spent so much money over the last years building these 40 locations when one single location should have been perfected before he really starts to scale.
That's crazy to me that like that mindset out there exists of like, well, we're not making much money, so if we open up 7 more locations, we'll finally make a little bit of money. Like the risk of that, like not making money on a single location.
Yeah, and if you're not making money to begin with from the single location, where are you going to come up with all the extra money to open additional locations? And people think, oh, well, I'll borrow it. That's the dumbest thing ever, honestly.
Well, that's just scary to take so much debt on for not great return.
Yeah, it's a risk, big risk.
I guess I'm not that risk adverse to do something like that. Because like even for me, I was like, when we signed our lease here, eventually we want to buy our own building. So I'd rather own versus just renting a space. But for now, this is what we do. And, I looked at the numbers of like, okay, if we were full, this is what those numbers would look like. But obviously we're never going to be full. So like, can we be profitable and hit the numbers I'm hoping we hit with this one location if we're at like 40% occupancy? Mm-hmm. And we did the math on the numbers. I was like, oh yeah, no, this is great. Like if we can hit 40%, we're doing pretty well. And then,
everything above and beyond that. Yeah. Because it's straight to the bottom line.
For me, I was thinking of it kind of like apartment complexes. Like apartment complexes don't plan on ever being 100% full. Like they want to be, I think, about 80%. If they're more than that, or maybe it's 70%. If it's more than that, they're priced too low. Mm-hmm. And if it's less than that, then they're priced too high. So they try to be at like 70%. So I was kind of trying to like work my math like similar. If like, okay, if we can be like, for me, it was like 40%. Like if we can be hitting numbers that are good at 40% occupancy of the rooms, then that's where once we get to 40%, then let's look at maybe a different location and go for 40%. Like we have the capability of going bigger and getting more, but at the same time, like I really don't want our place completely filled. It'd be nice, like obviously more money, but for me, we care more about the quality time with our clients and building those relationships with them. Like I was telling you, like off camera. And so for me, like I don't want us to be like other places where it's just so time slot heavy of like in and out. Like I want people to feel like they belong here and not just getting pushed in and pushed out.
Yeah.
So
I love that.
I want our numbers.
It's a smart way to approach it. Going back to like taking on too much debt, here's something that I think is relevant. Sometimes when people want to buy a business with zero money down, it sounds sexy, it sounds cool. But if you flip the script and just state it another way, you're buying a business at 100% debt. It's not smart. It's super risky. I mean, you just become over leveraged. I can't tell you how many businesses I've seen people buy where the seller did fine because they had no debt, but the buyer, if they get over leveraged, debt is what literally kills them, kills their ability to grow because they're stuck and they're saddled because they didn't put enough down. They over leverage themselves and they're stuck with the SBA payments that could go up or down based on the interest rate.
So let's talk about seller financing a little bit. Actually, that was one of the ones I had screenshotted as well. Can you talk a little bit about that? Is it a good idea to do seller financing?
There's plenty of times where it's appropriate. It really depends on the buyer, the seller, their needs, their goals. There are plenty of times where there's seller financing involved where it makes sense. I'll give you here's a perfect example. I have a business that's going on the market next week, not public yet. They do teeth whitening in the two of the big major malls here in Las Vegas. So bottom line, on their tax returns without any adjustments, any add backs, they have $327,000 profit before any adjustments. After we do adjustments, they're going to be over $450,000. Seller is, again, getting divorced. He needs to sell ASAP. And he's done well enough over the years, he doesn't necessarily care about top dollar. He cares about speed. So he's asking for $500,000, which is a crazy, if you divide that by the SDE, it's a super low multiple that he's asking, but he wants $100,000 down and $400,000 seller financing because he wants to find a buyer next week, meaning within a week of us going to market. And he'll do it because his price is aggressive and his terms are aggressive. So in that case, I'm never the one to say you should or shouldn't do seller financing. It depends on the buyer and the seller and what their goals are and what their needs are and what their priorities are.
Is it similar to like, I guess the terms, and I guess the terms are different no matter like every situation, but is it similar to like when you do like a seller financed home where a lot of times like the homeowner's keeping that note still. And so like if you miss your payments and you don't do it, then they just take it back.
Yeah, the business serves as collateral.
Okay, that's cool. I have a couple more. Most people think success is buying or selling a business. Well, most people think success in buying or selling a business is about finding the perfect deal. It's not. It's about iteration.
Yeah. Yeah. So iteration, what I was trying to get at in that post is fine-tuning the process, because most people, it's going to take a while for them to search and find the perfect business or what they deem as an ideal fit, what some people call the buy box. There's no real perfect business in any sense, but you need to find something that fits your buy box. But if you can go through and fine-tune the process of finding businesses, making offers, doing due diligence, and getting to the point where you can quickly determine if that business fits your buy box or not, and then if it is, move on it. If it doesn't, then quickly move on and find something else. And so that iteration process is more so about not being so picky that you can't identify an appropriate business, but also being able to have, almost like we've talked about, having a system, having a process. Just like the owner needs to build a business that has systems and processes. Without them, most smart buyers have a fairly good system and process to go through, because they're going to look at 100, 200 deals until they find the right one. The quicker they can iterate and go through and move from one to the next, the better off they're going to be to find the ideal business.
If a seller wants their price and their terms, you're not negotiating. You're dealing with a dictator, and it will be an uphill battle.
Yes. If only I could get sellers to realize it's like a teeter-totter, right? You can have your price, but you got to be flexible on the terms. If you want your terms, meaning all cash, you don't want to do seller financing, then you got to be flexible on the price. You can't have it both ways. On the teeter-totter, you can't get it both ways. And so you pull a lever on one and it affects the other.
Seller mistakes that kills deals. Trying to charge for your profits and then charge again for the stuff that made those profits. You can't say, pay me for the car and then charge extra for the engine.
Yes, I deal with this a lot. So essentially what that post was trying to get at is sellers, and I'll give you a real example. One business that's in escrow right now, it's a tire and wheel. They don't fabricate it, but they resell it. And so they have like $1.2 million of inventory. And the seller had, if I recall the numbers, basically like $400,000 profit. And so I valued the business at basically 3 times earnings, $1.2 million. And the seller said, oh, great, perfect, I'll take it. $1.2 million for the business and $1.2 million for the inventory. I'm like, wait a minute, no, that's not how it works. The inventory is what you used to generate the $400,000 profit. So you either have excess inventory, and we have a separate issue to deal with, or you have to include that inventory because you can't pull out the inventory that generated the profit to begin with. And so this is where a lot of brokers, just honestly bad brokers, try and combine the two and say, well, let's ask for the business, $1.2 million, and let's ask for the inventory. It doesn't work that way. No lender is going to loan on a business. They're going to factor in the whole thing, and they're going to expect the inventory to be involved. And so it's the same thing. Here's an interesting little side note. He did have too much inventory. And so what we did is we calculated a normalized level of inventory, which was about $500,000 or $600,000. And I got him to see kind of the whole process here. That was included. We're in escrow right now for $1.2 million. $600,000 of inventory is included. Now, the excess inventory is $600,000. The buyer is going to have the right to buy from him at cost. So he's going to act as a vendor over the next 12 months. Anything that the buyer doesn't buy from him, then the seller can liquidate off, but he has to include a normalized level of inventory.
See, and that's where I think it's so important that if you're trying to sell or buy, to use a business broker like yourself and really just use you, right? Because getting creative with something like that so it doesn't kill the deal and it's win-win for everybody and it makes sense. You're buying the business for what it's worth and everything included, which is kind of a crazy concept that you'd be like, oh no, but like Like, that's like me trying to sell the studio and be like, oh, you want all the mics and cameras and lights too? Like, no, I got to charge you for that. Like,
Yeah, it doesn't work that way.
yeah, it just wouldn't make sense, you know? And even if you're selling for a loss, right, that's just kind of what the numbers are. So who cares how much money you put into it? If it's not worth it on that math game for selling, it just is what it is.
Yep.
I didn't screenshot it, but along those same notes, you had a post about a seller who was trying to keep the boat.
Yes.
Can you talk just a little bit about that situation?
Yeah, so this was interesting because the boat, so this is where it gets a little bit of gray area. Is the boat an asset of the business or is it personal? He owned it in the business. Yes, he owned it in the business and he had the business pay for it. Now, that's a whole separate issue with his CPA of how they got away with writing that off, because most of the time you can't or you shouldn't. And for the most part, it was personal. But every so often, he would take clients out there or vendors on the boat. And so we had to have this back and forth with the seller and the buyer of, is the business truly needed to continue and operate the business? In other words, the question we really had to put forward is, if you took the boat away, would it negatively impact the business? And if it does, then we have to come to the conclusion that it might be part, at least an important part of the business assets. Now, that's not to say that the buyer has to buy the boat, but maybe he has to budget for renting a boat 4 times a year, and that then impacts the valuation because we've got to factor in that cost.
Breakfast in bed? Hard pass. I like my bed for sleep and 0 waffles.
Nothing to do with business. Yeah, so I'm not a breakfast in bed person. When I wake up, like I want to get up and moving. I do not want crumbs in my bed. That just sounds gross and nasty. And I've never had my kids, my wife, and just, look, if you guys want to make me breakfast on whatever, Father's Day, and I sleep in, great. I'll come down and eat breakfast at the kitchen table. I don't want a bunch of crumbs in my bed. And that doesn't even sound comfortable. Trying to like figure out how do I sit up, and no, breakfast in bed's a hard pass.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, we'll eat on our bed occasionally, but then, if there's any crumbs, it's so like, I got on my little one, he's 4 years old. He wanted to snuggle, and I got in his bed with him, and it was just full of like Pop-Tart crumbs. Because like in the morning before we're awake, he'll go open up a Pop-Tart and eat in his bed, watch it like on an iPad or something to like not wake us up. And I got in bed with him at night. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this is disgusting. He's like, lay with me, Dad. I was like, no. So we had to get it all off and then vacuum the floor. It's so gross. I don't know how people sleep in crumbs, but people are gross.
Yeah, not for me, but whatever. Other people, if they like it, that's totally up to them.
Awesome. Well, Trent, I appreciate you coming down. I think this is super informative. Like, it really shows like how much experience you have in this, and your knowledge comes through. Like, I've met a lot of brokers in my time, and you definitely stand out for sure.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Where can people find out more information about you and get in contact with you if they're looking to buy or sell?
Yeah, I'm on all the social media channels. They just have to look up my name. Sometimes it's under Trent Lee, Biz Broker, or something to that variation. Each one of them is a little bit different, but I'm on all the social media channels, posting there. They can always email me, trent@fcbb.com.
Welcome to Built in Vegas, the podcast where we spotlight the stories, strategies, and resources behind the businesses that make Vegas thrive. Whether you're starting up or scaling up, you're in the right place. Brought to you by the Video Podcast Studio.